Okay, welcome to our class in Mikra Yotze Midei Pshuto. I know that the title is a little bit hard to understand. That's really what we're going to spend the semester delving into is what does that title mean? But for now, it really shouldn't make sense to anyone. So don't worry if you don't know exactly what that means. But as you saw in the course description, the goal of the class this semester is really to come to a greater understanding of the relationship between the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shebal Peh, and really to understand what the role of Torah Shebechsav is in the halachic system, because our primary source of halacha is the Torah Shebal Peh, but of course, the Torah Shebechsav is an important part of our Masorah, which includes both our hashkafa of how we look at the world and also the halachic system. So what we're going to try to understand this semester is really the relationship between the Torah Shebechsav and the halachic system. We're going to focus on the halachic area. So when we talk about the relationship between Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh, everything we're going to discuss is really limited to the areas of halacha. Although we will, of course, touch upon hashkafa, those are intertwined. And we're going to try to understand what is the role of the pasuk in the halachic system. Which is really going to be fascinating because, again, the main halachic sources are in the Torah Shebal Peh, and yet we want to know what role does the pasuk play, and we're going to see that it plays a major role in the halachic system, but perhaps a little bit different than what we would have thought. So that's what we're going to explore this semester, and to come to really a greater appreciation of learning Chumash, which we sometimes call parshanut. That's, the process of learning Chumash in depth and analyzing the mefarshim. So we're going to hopefully come, Amir Tashem, to a greater appreciation of parshanut and of the halachic system. And, in general, of how much relevance Torah has for our lives. We're going to see this semester, we're going to engage in a lot of, serious learning, serious analysis of texts. And all of that is going to be for of course, the larger goal that we always have, which is more of an appreciation for the Masorah, and more of an understanding of how the Torah should inform both our behavior as Jews and our perspectives and our thoughts. So Amir Tashem, we have a lot of material to work with this semester. We're going to be pulling in sources from all over the place, from all over Torah Shebechsav, and from all over the Torah Shebal Peh. So we'll be able to see a lot of the messages contained in the Torah. This course is based on the writings of Rav Cooperman. So just to give a little bit of a background, Rav Cooperman was a major Talmid Chacham. I think he passed away in 2016 or, in the last few years. And Rav Cooperman really championed the idea that we need to be more involved in learning Tanakh properly. He talks about that in general, there isn't, Tanakh is not usually given the same amount of focus as other areas of Torah. And that usually the only people who are engaged in learning Tanakh are people who are in the academic world and are not interested in Torah as a pursuit of, how we think and how we look at the world. And they're not interested in Chazal, and they're not interested in all the things that we as Torah Jews care about. So he talks about how there's really a lack of serious Tanakh learning taking place because, again, the only people who are really engaged in learning Tanakh aren't engaged in it for the right reasons or with the right perspectives. So he really devoted his energies to creating svarim that explain how to learn Tanakh properly. And it's really mind-blowing, his writings. He has a lot of writings on the subject. This class will really be some of the core fundamental ideas that he lays out, that he presents in his writings. And it's just amazing to see because he really intertwined learning Torah Shebechsav with serious knowledge of Torah Shebal Peh, which again is something that's not always so available, sadly. That's what he said. He said, it's sad that it's not available. So this is what I tried to do. And it's really unbelievable to see somebody who was so knowledgeable in Tanakh and in, Gemara, Halacha, and all of that. And he really brings it together. And it's really fascinating. Rav Cooperman himself actually started Mechlala. So that's one of the things that he's known for. And his nephew is Rabbi Bernstein, who teaches in the seminaries. And Rabbi Bernstein's one of his books is a translation of Rav Cooperman's writings, the one called Pshuto Shel Mikra. So Pshuto Shel Mikra is actually the name of Cooperman had a bunch of svarim which he called Pshuto Shel Mikra. So it can get confusing a little times which one you're quoting from. But these ideas comes from his writings on Pshuto Shel Mikra.
What about Rashi Kipshuto? Is that his also, or is that like a subset?
I think that's a totally separate thing. As far as I know when I look for Cooperman's Pshuto, I always get confused with that one. I think that one might just be Rashi. I don't think it doesn't have anything to do with him, but I'm not sure if it's really talking about any subject similar to Cooperman himself. Yeah, so that was the when that came out, that was, kind of annoying for me. But yeah, but his svarim are all. If you ever see basically anything else called Pshuto, it's probably connected to Rav Cooperman. Okay, so basically the background of a little bit of the ideas we're going to discuss in this class is again the relationship of the realm of drash and the realm of pshat. I really wanted to do a huge, presentation of what exactly does it mean drash and what does pshat mean. But that really would be a lot on its own. But basically, pshat and drash are two methods of how we interpret the Torah text to extract the Torah messages. And there are two different ways of interpreting the Torah text. For now, we're not going to go into what drash means, because that's not really the subject of our class. But in general, drash would refer, and again, not to give really a specific, it also depends how pshat and drash are used in different contexts. So that's why it's hard to define. But in general, in our class, drash is going to be the level of halacha. It's going to be the halachic realm. And it's basically when Chazal use the tools that they were given, the midos, shator, nedreshes bahen, when Chazal used the tools that they were given for extracting the halacha from the Torah text. Right? So Chazal, we know they have all those tools of Elisheva and all those different tools that they have in order to understand the Torah text from a halachic standpoint. But the idea of drash is that it's not the most straightforward way that you would understand the text, right? It's really using all of these tools, and we're still taking the messages from the text, right? But it's not really from the text itself. It's sort of putting a lot of things into the text and adding things into the text in order to extract a message. So drash is in general part of the interpretation of the Torah that brings out the halacha. And as we're going to see, drash is still connected to the pasuk itself, but it's not what we would find if we just opened up a chumash and just read straight through, right? So it's really a way of interpreting the pasuk that's not, only based on the pasuk. It's based on a lot more, but of course it is one of the methods of interpretation, and that is the method of extracting the main halachos. And that's the method that Chazal mainly focus on. They are mainly involved in drash, in extracting what the halacha is from the text. And as we're going to see, that is the primary approach to Torah learning. Anyone who believes in the authority of Chazal, and again, in the basic core principles that Torah Jews believe in, they will agree that the primary way of interpreting the Torah is according to the method of drash, and that will bring out the main halachic sources that we have. So that is one way of interpreting the Torah text. The other way, that this is what we're going to focus on this semester, is the way of interpreting the Torah text through the realm of pshat, right? Pshat is generally, and again, this isn't, an exact, this isn't the only definition of pshat, but pshat would be when we look at the Torah text and we basically bring out what the Torah says from the pasuk, using rules of diktuk, right, of grammar, using rules of syntax, of language, of context. It's how we would understand it when we're just looking at the text and we're just trying to extract the messages. Okay, so it's really allowing the text to speak to us. And again, it doesn't mean, sometimes people think of pshat as being something simple or like maybe not so impressive. But pshat is very impressive, as we're going to see. It's very impressive, but it is using the basic kind of ways that we would interpret a verse, right? Again, according to the context. Context is important. According to the rules of grammar, right? All of that is how we read the text. And that would be according to the method of pshat. Okay. Now, when we look at a pasuk, right, the first thing when we're learning pshat, right, when we're focused on the pasuk and we're trying to extract the lessons that the pshat gives us, So the first thing that we need to ask is, of course, what is the pshat, right? What is this pasuk telling us? And again, it's not always so, let's say, so obvious, because we need to use the rules of grammar. Those are tremendous, right? A lot of times we don't know all the different rules of grammar, but we need to really look into the pshat and really discover what is the pshat telling us. So that's one part of the process. That's the first part. However, the thing that we need to then ask is that very often we look into the pshat, and actually the pshat seems to be totally different than what the halacha is, right? For example, we know that there's a pasuk that says ayin tachas ayin, right? An eye for an eye. That if someone gouges out a person's eye, so then midah keneged midah, they should have their eye gouged out, right? That's what the pasuk seems to say, an eye for an eye. That's how you translate an eye for an eye. Is one person, damages one person's eye, then he gets his eye gouged out. However, we know that Chazal tell us that that's not actually what takes place. What takes place is that we actually pay the monetary value instead of the eye. So here the pasuk tells us an eye for an eye. It's a very powerful statement, an eye for an eye. And it turns out that it's actually not an eye for an eye. It's still connected. It's true. It's still connected. It's the monetary value of an eye for an eye. But why didn't the pasuk tell it to us? Right? If you look at the context, it really looks like in context it's saying an actual eye, a literal eye for an eye, and yet that's not what it means. Right? And this is very strange. If the halacha is an eye for is a monetary value of an eye for an eye, then why don't we say that? Why isn't that what the Torah says? So the question that first we say, what is the pshat? What does the pasuk tell us? But then the next question is that really, why does the pasuk say this if that's not necessarily what we do? Now, obviously, this would be in certain psukim, right? But a lot of times, very often, we see this in the halachic passages in the Torah, that it's not what the halacha is. It's different than what the halacha is. And the way it's written, it almost seems like it's forcing us. It must be an eye for an eye. Very often, it's written very much in that way. This is what you have to do. And yet, it's not what we're supposed to do. It's not the halacha. And again, we know, of course, that if the halachic realm, if we're told money, then there's no question. Then we know that we don't do an eye for an eye. We do the monetary value. So what then do we do with this pshat? And that's really the question. After we say, okay, what is the pshat? Right? What does the pshat here actually tell us? What does the pasuk tell us? Then we say, what is this pasuk adding? What is this adding to our understanding of Torah? Whether halacha or hashkafa, what is this adding? And again, we would say that about eye for an eye. Why is it that the Torah writes this in a literal way, as if we're really going to gouge out the person's eye? So that's the question. The question we ask is, what is the role? What is the contribution of this pasuk? If it's not teaching us the halacha, then what is it teaching us? And that's really the question of learning pshat on a deep level. Again, the primary way of interpreting the pasuk is according to the halacha of Chazal. So then we need to ask, so then what is the pshat adding? What is the pasuk adding if Chazal give us a different halacha than what the pasuk says? Yes, Bela.
Hi. So I have a question. So the pshat in this example is the pshat an eye for an eye? Is that what it is?
Yes, exactly.
And then the drash is that we give monetary value.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, and then the second question we asked, does that have like a label or no? That question of what else is there? What level would that be? Is that something else or no?
Well, so you mean like the first question is what does the pshat tell us, right? Literally.
Right, so the first question is what's the pshat?
Right.
I guess the second question is what's the drash? Like what's the actual halacha?
Right. And then
that's another question. And then the next question is, well, why is it phrased this way if that's not actually what the actual halacha is?
Exactly.
So does that have a label of a specific, does that question have a label like pshat, drash? Is that another level of interpretation or no?
That's just the completion of saying what is the pshat. Because clearly the pshat is more than just, the depth of pshat. That's what we would be asking. What is the literal pshat? What is the drash? And what is the depth of the pshat? So you're right. It doesn't have a new label. It's just it's really part of our overall.
Oh, it's part of the pshat. It's part of that.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Got that.
Right. Exactly.
Now, next question is, Are you gonna answer that, or are you gonna keep us on the edge of our seats? Is that something we're gonna learn? Or
That's going to be the whole idea of this course, is what is the role of the pshat. Yeah, so that we're not going to answer it tonight. Yeah, I wanted to keep,
no, that example, I mean, we'll get to it in the course.
yes,
That example.
yes, that example,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your questions. Okay. And this question really, I mean, there's so many ways, so many examples here aside for an eye for an eye. There are so many ways that we're going to, so many examples. It's all throughout Torah. I'll just throw out another famous question. Eye for an eye is actually one of the things, like, that's basically the main example used, and we'll see. That's like a very huge example of this question. And there's a lot to say on that pasuk, and we will get to it. But another example of this question in action is we have the pasuk that tells us when to start counting the Omer. And it tells us, Mimacharas HaShabbos, the day after Shabbos. You should start counting the Omer the day after Shabbos. And we know that there, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard this example, there we know it's not literally Shabbos. It refers to the first day of the Yontif of Pesach. It's the day after Pesach. Right? And we know we start counting the Omer on the second night of Pesach, right? After the first night of Pesach on the second night. And yet the pasuk, when it tells us this halacha of counting from the second night of Pesach after the first night, it tells us the day after Shabbos. It calls Pesach there Shabbos. And this is another question that comes up. Why is it that the pshat is writing it in this way that seems funny, right? It seems funny. It seems to either contradict the halacha or, what is it doing, right? And we actually know that people discuss that, groups who don't believe in the Torah Sheval Peh, which is kfira, right? They're not keeping the Torah system that we believe in, but groups who had this piece where they made this stance against the Torah Sheval Peh, and they only kept the written Torah, we know that they count the Omer from the wrong day. Right, that's one of the things that they do. A lot of these halachos they'll end up doing wrong because they don't believe in the Torah Sheval Peh. Right, so there, we know that there are many times when the halacha is not what's written in the pasuk. And then we have to ask the question. So then, why is it written that way? Why is Pesach called Shabbos? Why? Why don't we just say from the day after the first night of Pesach? Why do we write it in this way that seems to make a problem, right? Why is it written in that way? And obviously, and this is one of the core principles of learning, and of course, the core principle of this class, Hashem gave us all of Torah, right? Pshat and Drash. He had it all in mind. He gave it over to us, and he created one unified system that is perfection, right? So why is it? Of course, they can't contradict. Of course not. They were given by one giver, right? They create one system. Hashem gave it to us. And Hashem, of course, writes the Torah in a way that is the most perfect, right? The most precise. So, of course, we need to ask, what is Hashem communicating to us through writing the language in this way, in a way that would seem to either contradict the halacha, or it doesn't seem to be, let's say, the most precise, or it doesn't seem to be, the most fitting. So, of course, we know it is. So then we ask the question, so what is taking place here? What is going on? Okay. Okay, and that is what we're going to answer this semester. How do we understand the role of pshat? How do we understand when we look at the pshat and it seems to tell us something that doesn't seem to make sense with what we know about halacha? So then how do we understand the pshat? Okay, so let's move on. That's a little bit of an introduction to this overall course and what we're trying to accomplish in this course. Today, we're going to do for kind of like background knowledge to the ideas in this course. It's not going to be exactly what we're going to talk about in this course, but the first thing we need to do is understand the authority of Chazal. That's really important. It's understanding the importance of the drash, right? Chazal are primarily focused on drash. They are the teachers of drash. And so we need to have that background where we understand the importance of drash before we can delve into the role of pshat. And so today we're going to look at the authority of Chazal in interpreting the psukim. And it's really going to show us the importance, the whole relationship between pshat and drash, how that works. Okay, so we are going to be looking a little bit at the concept of drash, but in order to understand its relationship with pshat. Okay, so this is, I sent the sources out, so we're going to start looking at those sources, and really our unit is called Torah as Shira. Okay, we know that the Torah, and this is what we're going to look at the Netziv, and the Netziv is going to talk to us about the concept that the Torah is referred to as Shira. We know Shira means song, right? So the Torah is referred to as being a song. And the Netziv really asks, why is it? What does this mean that the Torah is referred to as a song? Again, it has to have some meaning, right? We don't just say things in Torah. Everything has meaning. So the Netziv is going to ask this question, what does this mean that the Torah is a shira, a song? Okay. Okay, the Netziv wrote the Hamik Davar, right? And in the Hamik Davar, he has an introduction, the Kidmas HaEmek. And we're going to see what does he see behind the meaning of the Torah being called a song. So V'inei b'nedarim. Okay, 1 second. Sorry. Okay. V'inei b'nedarim helu haperush hamikra kisul chamas hashira shu kol Torah. Okay. So the first line just tells us that there's an idea here that the Torah is referred to as shira. Now at the end of the first line, yesh lavin hey ach nikra kol haTorah shira. So now we have to understand why is the Torah called shira? Yes, Bela.
Okay, I'm sorry. I missed it. Where exactly is the Torah called shira? Where do we find that?
So this is in reference actually to a pasuk where Hashem says to Moshe, write down this shira, this song. And a lot of people, there's different explanations, yeah. And then the Gemara talks about that this is actually a reference even to the whole Torah can be called song.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So So why is it that the Torah is called shira? It's not written as a song, right? We know there are certain times when the Torah actually is written in a way where, in terms of how it's actually written on the page, right? It's written as a shira or some sort of poetry, right? But we don't see that with the whole Torah. So how is it all called song? It's not written as a song. El al karchenu yesh ba teva v'segula tashira. So what it means, and Netziv says what it means is that it has the characteristics of a song, of shehu b'lashon melitza. It is poetic. It's written in a poetic way. Sorry. What does that mean? We have to understand, how is it written poetically? What are the characteristics of poetry that are also true about Torah? Di'adua l'chol mevin im Talmud. Dishona hamalitza misipure prazi b'shnei inyanim b'teva u'v'skula. He says it's known to anyone who has this knowledge that poetry is different than prose, and he's going to give 2 ways that it's different. Okay, there's 2 characteristics. The nature of poetry is different than prose, right, than a regular way of speaking in 2 ways. Aleph. When it comes to a song or poetry, the matter being discussed is not really so clear, right? It's in some way, it's not exactly so clear exactly what we're talking about, right? The way we actually speak in normal language, that, we're saying what we actually mean, right? But when it comes to a song, it's not really, it's like a mashal, right? It's not exactly what is being discussed. It's not so clear. And you would need to make notes in the margins, right? You need to analyze, to know what exactly it's talking about. Right? What are the notes that you make in the margin? Oh, you say this line is a reference to this story. And this line is a reference to that. Right? You have to make those lines in the note, in the lines of the song to know what each line refers to. It's referring to something deeper than what it seems at first. V'lo mikra drush. Now, this is not called drush, right? It's not called, right, like how we talked about, let's say, drash. Drash isn't just looking at what exactly it says in the text. It's kind of bringing in other information and fitting it into the text. So here, if someone takes a poem and they analyze every line and they write notes on the side, that's not called drush. That's not some sort of, kind of far-fetched meaning. That's not really the literal meaning of the song. It's not true. Actually, this is the most straightforward way of understanding the ideas, right? Poetry, when poetry is written in a way when it's not so clear what exactly we're referencing, so actually the most, let's for now use the word correct, but really the most, let's say, like literal explanation is actually the analysis, the deep analysis that's taking place, because poetry is not written to be taken purely literally. Even if it's talking about something that it seems literal, there's something deeper being communicated. So all of the analysis that delves into and tries to understand what the author is actually referring to, all of that is really the most straightforward, most literal way of understanding the text. That's what the author had in mind. He says here, afilu shel hedyot, even a regular person, when we engage in writing poetry, that's what we do. We hint at things, we reference things. It's not really meant to be taken literally. It's meant to reference some other idea that we had in mind. And that is really the most, straightforward way of understanding the text. ומושכל עוד זה מי שיודע בטוב עניין שהביא לידי מליצה זו שנתחבר עליו, מתוק לו אור לשון של השיר, ודקדוקיה הרבה יותר מלאיש שאין לו ידיעה מתכונת העניין. Okay, let's explain that line. What he says here is, let's say some sort of poetry, okay, is written, or some sort of song is written in reference of a certain matter, right? It's a reference either a certain event that took place, maybe an important political event or an important event in someone's life, whatever it is. Or it's a reference to something deep that the person feels, some deep idea that they have, whatever it is, okay? That person, if let's say it's talking about a specific event, so let's say it's an event of, in a person's life, let's say it's their graduation, right? So if somebody then writes a poetry about, going through all the emotions and the experience of graduating, so someone who was familiar with that event, they know which event the author is talking about, maybe they experienced it with the author, whatever it is, that person is going to have a clear understanding, a very deep understanding. Thank you, Bela. I appreciate it. I didn't want to use any literature words because I think I would just mess it all up. But thank you. Yes, it is alluding, right, to an event. This poem is alluding to an important event in the person's life. And right, anyone who's familiar with that event, they were in some way, let's say, connected to the event. So maybe they know the author really well, so they really, know how the author feels about that event. They are going to understand this this poetry or whatever, this piece of literature in a very deep way. They're really going to understand what the author is talking about. However, let's just say I pick up a random poem and I don't know what it's talking about. I don't know what the author has in mind. I don't know the author. I don't know anything about the person who wrote this or why they wrote it. All I know is the words that I'm looking at. So I'm really not going to understand that piece of poetry. Maybe I'll get something out of it, but it could be that I really won't understand any of it because I'm not familiar with the real meaning behind this poem, this song. Okay, so here, let's see where we are. Okay, here. I need to highlight 1 second so we all know where we are. Okay, we're about to get to that line. But basically we said so far, right, just what we were just talking about, that someone who's more familiar with what the person is writing about, why they're writing it, what they went through, whatever it is, they're going to have a clear understanding of that, of the meaning of the poetry. However, someone else who comes, and this is really the first time that they heard this, here he's saying that they are in danger. Someone who's hearing this for the first time, they don't know what this poem is referring to. They're just looking at the poem and taking it at face value right? They're just they don't have previous knowledge. They don't have any of the background. All they know is exactly what they're looking at. They are going to get themselves in trouble, and they're going to create their own meaning, their own understanding of what's taking place here, completely made up, right? They're going to look at a poem that's, totally unclear, and they're going to stick in, backgrounds and, thoughts and meaning and everything where it doesn't exist because they're just making up what they think. They're making up things which are totally untrue. It's not at all what the author thought. The author wrote in this way where he's using allusion, right? He's not speaking in a way that's really conveying literally what he means, right? You would have to understand how to decode what he's saying. So someone who randomly comes across this poem and tries to decode it is just going to be engaging in something meaningless, right? He's going to be saying a lot of crazy things, nothing to do with what the author actually intended. Okay, kahu teva kol Torah. Now he's going to connect this back to Torah, and he says, this is true with Torah, right? The story contained in the Torah is actually not that clear. It's not so straightforward, right? We need to decode what the Torah says. We actually have to take the Torah and we have to analyze and make notes and comments, and according to the grammar and the language, right? It takes a lot of analysis in order to understand the Torah. The lo nikra drush. This is not called drush. This isn't some deeper, far-fetched idea. No, this is elakahu pshat hamikra. This is the most literal, straightforward meaning of the text. That's what it means to be shira. This is the most straightforward meaning of the text, is to be analyzed and decoded. Umuskal od she'en adam yachol la'amod al diktuk divar Hashem im lo shemechavein le'ize davar halacha o musar ba'agada haba bekabala b'divrei chazal. The other thing he says is no one can really understand what Hashem is communicating, what he's saying in the Torah text, if you don't know what piece of halacha or musar or agada that is brought in the words of Chazal. Meaning, like we said before, if you don't know this author and you don't know that the author just graduated and that's why he's writing poetry, so then you don't know what's going on here. You have no idea how to start analyzing this poem. You have no background on the author. So if we have no background on Hashem, we can't decode what he says in the Torah. In order to really understand what it says in the Torah, we need to know all of the writings of Chazal, right? Because there they give us the background information that we can then use to decode what the Torah is saying. So the words of Chazal and how Chazal uses the tools that they have and uses the information that they have, they use those tools and information in order to decode the Torah based on, right, what Hashem had in mind. That's not something deeper, some secondary way of interpreting Torah. That is the primary way of interpreting Torah, because they are using the knowledge that the author gave them in order to interpret the author's words. And that's the concept of the Torah being a song. In order for us to interpret the Torah, we have to have the necessary background and the necessary tools for decoding the Torah. And that's what the Netziv is saying here. This is why Chazal, their interpretation of the Torah is so important, and it's primary because they provide all of that information. They had that information and they provide it. Yes, Bela.
Hi, okay, so 2 questions. One is just to clarify. So the first one is, the Netziv said that the poetry is different than prose in 2 ways. One way is that you need to analyze it and make notes in the margin. And is the second way that you need to know what it's alluding to or what it's referencing? Are those the 2 ways?
So those are actually both one way. We're not going to do the second way. Yeah, the second way is more about the concepts of a song and how to analyze it and why it's similar to the Torah, but it's not really connected to our class. So the first way really includes both of what you're saying. That first of all, it's not written in a way that's so clear, so it demands deeper interpretation, right? It can't be taken at face value. It demands interpretation. And how do we access that interpretation? Through the information that Chazal had. That's how we access that information. So it's really all connected.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so that clarifies that. But then
Mhm.
the other question is, when I learn Chumash, I like to learn with I like to learn with an English translation because my Hebrew grammar isn't good enough. So when I'm learning, let's say the Art Scroll or Steinsaltz has a Chumash, you know, when I'm learning their Chumash, and especially the Art Scroll, they'll have, you know, comments, let's say on the bottom, they'll have comments. So those comments that bring, let's say it brings from Gemara, it brings from Agada, it brings from different things, that is considered shot in what we're talking about right now. Is that correct?
So I don't want to yet categorize those things because what he's talking about, even though he says that the drash in this case is the pshat, it's still not how we refer to it. We still call the drash and that kind of analysis drash, and the pshat is still the more literal, straightforward meaning of the text. So we're not yet, when you learn Chumash, it is still that you're engaging in pshat. But we're not yet going to categorize those statements when a commentary brings a piece from Chazal. What is that considered? We're not yet going to categorize it. That's a little bit more complex. We need to build up to getting to that answer. Does
Okay,
that
so would that mean, because I was about to ask you, but this might be getting ahead too. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was about to ask you what the Nitziv would consider drash then.
Right, so we're gonna see. It's very
Okay.
interesting what you're saying. Yeah, we'll see. We'll get to
Okay.
most of your question today. But really the whole course is going to be answering your questions. So, that's why we're going to have to see more, but we will answer most of it today. I
Okay,
think
thank
we're
you.
still okay. We still have time. Yes, Mrs. Kosowski.
Yeah, so interesting. So I just wanted to comment that as someone who's from birth, our system incorporates so much drash that we forget how the pshat looks to someone who doesn't know all the drash.
Mhm.
An example of this is I saw one of my friends who's a master teacher giving a class to people, who are not Orthodox affiliated. And she's talking about Abraham Avinu, and she right away launched into, as an assumption, Abraham's great chesed. And he's, we know him for chesed, and she was going to launch off from there into her whole deep thing. And a woman said, "What do you mean kindness? I don't see anywhere in the Torah that he's kind. As a matter of fact, he threw out his wife, he threw out his child. Where do you see kind?" So I think it's just a fascinating thing that what you're talking about is so true. We're almost divorced from the clear pshat because from first grade on, we're always learning medrash. So it's an interesting thing to kind of strip away the pshat, the drash for a second, and say, "Oh, what's actually in the Torah Shabbat?" Kind of to go back to that.
It's very interesting. And that's why really this is, what Rav Cooperman was talking about in his book. I don't know if everyone was here right from the beginning, but Rav Cooperman did talk about in his Sefer that the important place of pshat in the Torah system, right? It's there, right? It's part of the Torah system, and yet it's very often not really studied. But we're going to see it's very complex though in terms of what you raised, Mrs. Kosowski, is a little bit different than what we're going to talk about in this course, because in this course we're focusing purely on the passages about halacha, right, and not about the agada, the stories, the people, right? So it's very it's kind of complex, and what we're going to see though is that there is, and this is what we're seeing here from the Netziv, we really do need to start off with the drash and with Chazal. But you're right, we need to also be able to ask that question where, well, why doesn't this appear in the pshat? Clearly, there's something different taking place in the pshat that also needs to be studied. So it's interesting, the Netziv here is going to talk, we're going to do a few more pieces from the Netziv, and he's going to talk about the importance of, yes, of really focusing on the writings of Chazal, but that it doesn't end there. That's what he says. It doesn't end there. It maybe starts there, but also we need to be able to learn the stories about Abraham from the text, right? That also needs to be done. And here we're going to see with halacha, yes, halacha is primarily in the writings of Chazal. It's primarily in drash. People do not open up a chumash in order to learn halacha. That wouldn't be correct. It's not what you're supposed to do. However, someone needs to, we need to learn why the Torah presents halacha in a certain way, and that's something that we cannot forget about. And it's something that, like you're saying, it's so often it is forgotten about. And that would be tragic because that's a whole area of Torah with so much depth. Let's look at Oh, sorry, that line is just gonna end up going with us. Okay. I just wanna mention here. Oh, I forgot to bring in my example. And Bayla, I was thinking of you. A lot of times when I'm trying to think of a good example in terms of understanding this aspect, that really the most literal way of understanding what's being written is not actually the literal words. It's the meaning that the author had in mind. So it makes me think of the book Animal Farm, right? Anyone who read that. Now, last time I read Animal Farm, we read it when I was in 8th grade, and it was life-changing. So I think about it all the time. But I have no idea. I don't remember any of the details. I don't remember any of the meaning. I don't remember anything about it. But if you've read Animal Farm, you know that when George Orwell wrote Animal Farm, he gave like this mushel, and I hope I'm saying it right because again, this, it's been years since I looked at it. But George Orwell wrote using a mushel. He gave a story of a bunch of animals on a farm and how they interact with each other, and all these different interesting aspects of these animals on a farm, and they're talking to each other and they're making plans and they're doing all these things. Obviously it's not anything that would be literal. It's totally not, what actually animals do on a farm, right? But the whole point of the story is that he's using it as a mushel, right? In order to understand the political realities that take place, human nature, right? This is what he's trying to convey to his reader. He's trying to convey a deeper understanding of human nature and the reality of politics, right? And the reality of what takes place in politics. And I don't remember exactly which political time he was talking about. I'm sure at the time I had no idea what we were talking about. But he refers to actual political events, and the way he explains it so that you can see the human nature that was taking place during those events, and so that so that he could break it down in a way that would be accessible to readers. So he created it, instead of writing, this is the political round, this is what happened, this is what this leader did, this is what the people said. Instead of saying it in a way that was very political and maybe would be hard for people to understand, he wrote it in this way of using animals, right, in place of the people. And he gave this larger understanding of the political realities that were taking place by using this mushel of a bunch of animals on a farm and how they interact with each other. Now, anyone who reads the book, right, George Orwell was not writing some sort of entertainment. I'm sure it's very entertaining to read it on the, literal level, but that wasn't Orwell's goal, right? His whole point was in order that you should take this book, right, and you should understand the background that he came to, that he, came with when he wrote this book, and you should take out the lessons on human nature that he was alluding to. If you take the book literally and you think, you know what, I'm not going to do what all these crazy people do, and they analyze his book, I'm going to take it literally. I'm going to be really loyal to what he meant, and I'm going to take his book at face value and understand it literally. So then you're not understanding what he really meant, because you're understanding something that I don't even know if it makes any sense. I'm not sure. Again, I don't really remember the details, but I doubt it makes any sense in any way, at all, if you were to take it literally, right? But thank you, Bayla. Right? If you take it literally, then you miss the whole point, right? Then it's very entertaining, I'm sure, but you miss the whole point, right? The actual literal meaning of the story are the deeper political messages of human nature that he is conveying. And I think, to me, that's how I understand what the Netziv is saying, is that if you understand, the stories in Tanakh on a literal level, so you might think you're being the most loyal to the Torah, but actually you're totally missing the point, right? Now we're going to see that we are also allowed to understand the Pshat. So we're going to see that with Torah, it's a little different. But really, if the Torah is a Shira, and that's what we're told, then actually it's not so clear at first if we would even be allowed to engage in Pshat. How do we know we're allowed to take the literal meaning of the text? Maybe that's not at all what Hashem was communicating. So what the Netziv here is saying is something so fundamental. And we're going to see more fundamental pieces from the Netziv. But again, Rav Cooperman, one of the things he was doing was he was fighting again modern academics, this is something we see today in the world, and it's not just in the realm of academia. That's what he was talking about it. But we see it even in the realm where people call themselves Torah learners, and they don't understand that taking the Torah at a literal level without Chazal's background, what they give us, then you're going to misunderstand the author's intentions. The author intended for there to be a Torah Shebechsav and a Torah Shebal Peh. And it's not so clear. We're gonna talk about this, but it's not so clear that we can just jump right to Pshat. That's not so clear. We need to do the drash. We need to analyze using the authors, what he told us. He told us the information we need to know in order to engage in the proper analysis and extract the real meaning behind the text. Okay, and that's why Chazal, they are the primary way of interpreting the text. The Chazal use drash. That is the primary interpretation of the text. Now look at this next piece, the Hamak Shela. This is also from the Netziv. And he writes, Umisha rotza lahafshit lefi da'ato. Someone who wants to give pshat according to his own understanding. Kol od lo amad al das Chazal. He hasn't learned Chazal. He doesn't know Chazal's approach to Torah learning. He just wants to skip right to pshat. And he wants to give his own interpretations. Yesh lachush shehu apikoros. You should be careful. This might be an apikoros, a kofer, right? He's really denying the Torah. He's giving explanations that are actually against what the Torah says. The umateh hamikraos achar da'atam. He is manipulating the psukim and he's explaining the psukim according to his own views. But who is he, right? If he's going to come, someone doesn't have a background in Chazal, and they're going to come and start interpreting the Torah and giving new explanations, and they have no background in any of the approaches to understanding Tanakh. So everything they say, it's going to be against what the Torah is actually communicating, because they don't have the tools. They don't have the information, and they don't have the tools in order to interpret the Torah text. So Pshat is something we have to be very careful of until we are. Now we're going to see the Netziv, and this is something very important. The Netziv himself gives a lot of very novel interpretations of the Pshat. We're going to talk about this in the future in this course. The Netziv is definitely someone who, thought it was allowed and encouraged, right, to give these Pshat interpretations of the text that are not so, they're not what Chazal said on those psukim. They're very novel and they're very interesting. But he could only do that once he had the approach, the foundation of Chazal. He knew Chazal's interpretations. He knew Chazal's overall, the necessary approaches, right? There are overall approaches to being able to interpret a text. He had those approaches already, so then he could engage in Pshat. But he could not skip the aspect of being engaged in Drash and being engaged in Chazal's writings. He first had to be loyal, had to learn and internalize those writings, and then he could go and learn the Pshat and give his own interpretations. Okay, I see, as usual, I'm running out of time. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Okay. Now, we're going to do one more piece from the Netziv here. The Netziv says, we'll do this piece outside. But what the Netziv says is there's a line that says in the Gemara, which says, hold your children back from contemplation in the psukim. Then the Netziv says, how do we understand that? What does that mean? What it means is that a person is allowed to analyze psukim and to, and again, according to certain Torah rules, they can then go and use those rules to interpret the psukim and to come up with new pshat understandings of the text. However, in order for a person to be qualified to engage in creating new pshat interpretations, they have to have, again, the foundation in Chazal and have the fundamental principles for interpreting the Torah text. They need to have those down, right? You can't just skip, pshat is not, sometimes we see this, that people who don't understand the, precision of Torah and how Torah works, right? You'll hear them, they'll say like, I opened up this story and I just read through, right? I hear a lot of people who, they have like literally no background in learning at all, right? And they'll tell me that, they love learning, the passages in Yoshua. They just open it up and they just read straight through and this is what they think, right? That's not how it works. It's not like, it's not like this is just, what everyone thinks goes and everyone's ideas are beautiful. No, a person needs to have the right background in order to be qualified to come up with their own interpretations. Otherwise, like we saw with the Netziv before, otherwise they're in danger of, taking ideas that are anti-Torah and actually putting them into the psukim, right? Because they don't know how to interpret the psukim. You can't just make it up. Hashem is the author. There are precise ways of understanding the pasuk. It can't be whatever you think out of thin air, right? It has to be based in, what Hashem thought, right? And what Hashem told us in the writings of Chazal. And that's what the Netziv again talks about here, right? And he says here, you can learn Tanakh. You just can't create interpretations, right? You can learn Tanakh, but if you're going to start analyzing it yourself and creating new interpretations, that's going to be a problem. But I would say is for us, is that first of all, we have to make sure that we have both of these areas of Torah, right? We do have to learn Chazal's writings, right? It's not like none of that is for women. There's a lot among the writings of Chazal that we do need to know as women. So first of all, we should have that background in Chazal also while we're learning Tanakh. And at the same time, to be careful to make sure that what we're, when we're analyzing the Torah, to make sure that we're not putting in views that aren't there, right? If you go through the Torah text and you have guidance, right, of the Mefarshim will help you to understand the Torah text in a way that's proper. But be careful for yourself, right, that again, you're not fitting in whatever ideas you have from before that maybe don't come from the Torah, that you're not sticking it into the Torah. We have to be very careful, right? We need the Torah to be speaking to us. We need Hashem, right, to be telling us what he thinks. We're not trying to tell Hashem what he thinks, right? We're not trying to make, we don't think we're smarter than Hashem, that we should use the Torah text to prove our ideas, right? We want the Torah text to tell us what Hashem thinks so that we can take that wisdom and we can make that into our wisdom. So that's something to just keep in mind. Okay, so the last piece, so basically to sum up what we said tonight, so far, we're not done, is that, again, the real primary way of understanding the Torah text is through the interpretations of Chazal. They were given the knowledge and the tools in order to interpret the Torah text properly. And that is why Chazal's interpretations of the Torah text are the primary interpretations. And those are very important. It's fundamental for us to be familiar with their interpretations and with their approach to learning. Now, what we said so far, we said a few things from the Netziv, but as we talked about at the beginning, right, it's not so clear that we would be allowed to engage in Pshat, right? Like we said with Animal Farm, I'm sure, a lot of people read Animal Farm also for fun, but again, the literal meaning of Animal Farm is meaningless. It's not what Orwell had in mind at all. So here, how do we know Hashem? And like the Netziv said, lahavdil, if Hashem is writing something, so then he obviously has a lot more depth in those writings, right, than a human author. So how do we know that we're allowed to look at these divine texts, right, at the Torah? How do we know we're allowed to interpret it on the, in the interpretation of Pshat? In a more literal, more straightforward, what the text is saying, how do we know that that's actually proper? And the way that we know is because Chazal told us. Chazal told us, and we're going to see this throughout the course, quotes that talk about this, that even though Drash is the primary interpretation of the Torah, Pshat also has a role. And because Pshat also has a role, we want to engage in it. There's more to learn, and Chazal encouraged that Pshat should be learned as well. And that is where the authority to learn Pshat comes from. It comes from Chazal. And again, this is what Rav Cooperman talks about again and again, is that, people who deny the authority of Chazal and only want to look at the Pshat, so, they don't understand that the only right that we have to look at the Pshat is because Chazal gave us permission. Really, without Chazal's permission, we would have no right to interpret the Torah based on the Pshat. Once they gave us permission, then we engage in it. But it's really the authority to engage in Pshat comes only because we believe in Chazal. Okay, so let's look at one more source tonight. And this is we're going to raise some questions and then we're going to answer them next time. This comes from the Gemara in Shabbos. And there is a conversation taking place about whether or not a person is allowed to carry a weapon on Shabbos. Right? We know obviously that there are halachos about not carrying on Shabbos. So the question becomes, is a person allowed to carry a weapon on Shabbos? And Rabbi Eliezer says that a person is allowed to, because it would be considered, it's like jewelry, right? We know we're allowed to wear jewelry on Shabbos. So a weapon would be an ornament, that a person's wearing, and therefore they would be allowed to carry it on Shabbos. Because again, it's not really playing the role of a weapon. It's kind of playing the role of like an ornament. Therefore, they are allowed to wear it on Shabbos. So now let's look at this inside. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Tachshitzin Hein Lo. So Rabbi Eliezer says it is an ornament for him. My Tama de Rabbi Eliezer de Amar Tachshitzin Hein Lo. Now, where does Rabbi Eliezer get this? How does he know that this would be an ornament for the person? Because there's a pasuk that says, Chagur charbecha al yarech gibor. And it says, gird your sword upon your thigh, mighty one. Chodcha v'hadarecha. It is your glory and your splendor. Okay, so a pasuk says, you mighty person, right? You should gird your sword because it is your glory and your splendor. Okay, so that's, he says that means that there's a certain amount of glory it brings to a person. Therefore, he's allowed to wear it on Shabbos because it's like jewelry for him, right? It's something that brings him splendor, right? It's nice. It has like this nice, beautiful aspect. Therefore, he can wear it on Shabbos. Amar le Rav Kahana lemar b'rei de Rav Huna. So Rav Kahana said, Hai b'divrei Torah ksiv. He said, hold on a second. That pasuk that talks about, gird your sword, it is your glory and your splendor. That's actually in the Drash realm. Chazal understands it to be a reference to Torah. It is a reference to Divrei Torah. Now, Rav Cooperman, and we're gonna explain this according to the Ramban and according to Rav Cooperman. But it seems to me, and I, this is one line that I'm not sure if I understood it 100%. So I just want to make that clear. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But it seems to me that Rav Huna, sorry, who am I talking about here? Rav Kahana is saying, this pasuk, which you just used as a halachic proof, you said that we're allowed to wear a sword outside because it is, glory for the person wearing it. This has halachic ramifications, right? This is the clear pshat of the pasuk, and it has halachic ramifications of whether or not a person can, engage in this activity on Shabbos. And Rav Kahana says, Chazal have already interpreted this pasuk in the realm of drash to mean divrei Torah. It seems to me, based on what Rav Cooperman, how he analyzes this, that Rav Kahana's question is, how can it be that in the drash realm of halacha, we are using a pshat interpretation? There is a drash interpretation that exists, which means this pasuk refers to Torah. So now, how can you have two realms colliding? Either we're engaging in the pshat realm, in which case, yes, a sword brings glory, but also that, but would there be any halachic ramifications to that? Or are we engaging in the halachic realm, in which case, if we're going to analyze this pasuk from a halachic standpoint, this pasuk in the drash halachic realm is a reference to divrei Torah. Okay, so again, afterwards we're going to have to review this this whole passage. But again, Rav Kahana says, are you understanding this pasuk in the realm of drash or in the realm of pshat? In the realm of drash, we've already said that this refers to divrei Torah. That is your splendor. You, mighty one, should wear divrei Torah because it will bring you splendor. However, here they're using this pasuk as a proof in halacha, but they're understanding it in the realm of pshat. So Rav Kahana says, how can you use this pasuk in the realm of halacha and use its pshat interpretation? That's how I understand his question. Amar le ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto. There's our line. They responded to him and they said, you know how? Ein mikra yotzei midei pshuto, which literally, this is the literal explanation of that line. A verse, a pasuk, does not depart from its pshat meaning. Okay, again, Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto means a pasuk does not depart from its pshat. Let's for now say literal meaning. Whatever the pasuk is communicating cannot be completely uprooted from that pasuk. Whatever the pasuk says in a literal way cannot be completely robbed from that pasuk. There is it has to be a part of that pasuk. Okay, so even the pshat interpretation is inherently part of this pasuk. You can't uproot it. You can't ignore it. But we're going to have to give a lot more explanation to that line. We're not at all finished yet. Now, Amar Rav Kahana, this is what Rav Kahana responded. Kad, we're not going to do that line inside. I'll just tell you two outside. Rav Kahana responds to this line and he says, I learned all of Shas and I didn't know that Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto. Even though I'm a huge Talmid Chacham and I know all of Shas, I never knew that Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto. I never knew that a verse cannot completely depart from its pshat meaning. Now, obviously, this is a very hard, conversation to understand. What did Rav Kahana not know here? Right? What does this mean? First of all, we didn't really understand what does it mean that a pasuk cannot depart from its pshat meaning, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I just freeze for a minute? Okay, I'll continue. Sorry, 1 second before I take questions. What we said is that we need to understand Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto, right? We need to understand what does that mean that a verse does not completely depart from its pshat meaning. What does that mean? What does that teach us? But also what we need to know is this answer of Kahana. Rav Kahana knew all of Shas and he never knew that a verse doesn't depart from its literal meaning. Like, what is he actually saying here? I mean, he must know that we have many cases in the Torah, throughout the Torah literature, where the pshat and the drash do not agree, right? That's anyone who's learned all of Shas knows that there are places where the halacha and the words in the pasuk don't seem to fit together, right? So what is he saying here? What is this chiddush? What is Ein Mikra teaching us? Now, we're going to leave that off for next time, and we're going to explain this next time. Next time, what we're going to do is we're going to understand what is the meaning of Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto. What does it mean that a verse never fully departs from its pshat meaning? And what is the chiddush here that Rav Kahana was never aware of until now? And we're going to spend the whole session next time just understanding, just defining this idea of Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto. And at the beginning of class, we will review this piece in the Gemara so that, we're all on the same page again. And we're going to go into it again more in depth. What does it mean, Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto? What is the principle that's being laid out here? And what was Rav Kahana, what was so impressive to him? Yes, I see we have some questions. Mrs. Kosowski, do you have a question?
No, I just want to say thank you. It was a great class. I did want to ask, where was that original pasuk from about wearing the sword?
Oh, that is from Tehillim.
Oh, okay, great. Everything always is. Okay, thanks. Have a great night.
Sure. Bela.
Yes. So I know Rav Kahana is asking this question, but who answers Ein Mikra? Who gives that answer?
So here it seems to say that it's Mar, the son of Huna. He is having this conversation with Rav Kahana. So
and he's the one that says this.
He's the one that says this. I just wanna this is the main place where this is usually discussed when people are, talking about the concept of pshat. But I do just want to mention that this is not the only time that Ein Mikra Yotzei Midei Pshuto appears in the Gemara. So there is another time that it appears also. I'm not sure, there might be a third, but I know there is a second time where it appears as well. And this is, again, usually the place where it's kind of discussed. But it's not like Mar made this, it's not like Mar is the only one who ever said this. This is something that we see in other places as well. Yes, Tzipora.
Oh yeah, thanks so much. Very interesting. I also really like the animal farm analogy.
Okay, good.
But I wanted to ask, because you mentioned before about you should try to steer away from sort of reading pshat and implanting your own ideas.
Yeah.
But I feel like I don't know. I'm just like curious when you think about how I feel like a lot of times like that's like people come out with new books and like we're just like it's sort of refreshing to try to read the Torah and sort of think about like how your own ideas fit into the ideas that are being presented.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that what it would say, because again, the Netziv himself does really come up with all these new interpretations. And it's definitely something that he would encourage. I think the danger is that a lot of times we see this, we do see this a lot today, and it's something that we want to be very careful of, is that people who are not qualified, let's say, to give interpretations, so a lot of times they'll take their own ideas, which may or may not be based in the Torah, but a lot of times, how many of us can really say that everything that we truly believe is really, really based 100% in the Torah, right? And a lot of times they come and they put it into the psukim, right? And they use it to, they give it over as if it is truly what the psukim is saying. And instead of saying, this is my own idea, it becomes an idea that's given the authority of the Torah itself, right? And that is something that's potentially very dangerous, right? If something is not a Torah idea, and then it's given the authority of the Torah by connecting it to a pasuk. So this is something that would be very dangerous, right? It's scary, right? Potentially it's very, very scary. But what I would say is, I don't think, let's say people like us who I'm not sure how many of us fit the Netziv's qualifications, but I don't think it means that people like us can't come up with our own interpretations. But what I think it means is that before you would popularize it, or before you would in your own mind, like, make it as if it's established fact that this is a way of interpreting the pasuk, I think it's important to discuss it with the Talmud Chacham. I don't think the Netziv would say to stop, being creative, because each of us has so much to add, to the world of Torah. We each have an obligation to add to the world of Torah. And Rav Kuperman talks about this a lot in his Sefer. He's always talking about how, every base medrash has to have a chiddush, right? A base medrash, a place of learning, it has to be that there's new ideas that are, being discussed, right? Each of us have to be discussing new ideas based on what we learned. But I think the danger becomes when we don't run this by someone who knows more than us, but we just assume that it has the authority of the Torah when perhaps the only authority it really deserves is our own thinking, right? And I think it's just something to be aware of. But I wouldn't say to stop, engaging in the creative aspect of Torah as much as to just proceed with caution, right? Just be careful. Just have this warning that, we do have to be careful with what we, how we interpret Torah based on our own understanding.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, have a great week. And I look forward, Mirz Hashem, to seeing you all next week and continuing our learning.
Thank you. Happy Tu B'Shvat.
Thank you.
Have a good night.